In the span of 5 years, a small watering hole in Texas was responsible for multiple cave diving tragedies. The biblical water hole became the most infamous underwater cave system in the Lone Star State, and then the world, as it was dubbed one of the most dangerous diving spots in the world. Local officials would try to block the vast cave system with a grate of rebar and quick-set concrete over the entrance, but within months, divers found a way around the blocked entrance before leaving a plastic slate stating, "You can't keep us out." To this day, there have been 12 confirmed deaths within the cave system, with some of the bodies never being recovered. This is the story of Jacob's Well. Jacob's Well is a renowned natural spring in the Texas Hill Country. It's known for its crystal clear water and popularity as a summer swimming spot. However, it's also infamous for its extensive and dangerous underwater cave system. The treacherous cave network, with its narrow passages and intricate pathways, presents a formidable challenge even to the most seasoned divers. In the middle of the 1850s, a newcomer to Texas was strolling beside a creek somewhere between San Antonio and Austin. He was on a hunt for a perfect spot to build a mill powered by water. As he walked along the creek's edge, observing the flow and the surrounding land, he noticed an unusual disturbance. There was a section of the creek that seemed rougher than the rest, almost like a bubbling cauldron right in the middle of the water. Unlike regular rapids formed by water flowing over rocks, the disturbance appeared to be coming straight up from the river, bubbling as high as 6 feet into the air. Little did the man know he had stumbled upon a karst spring, later named Jacob's Well. This area of Texas is home to the Trinity Aquifer, a vast underground water source that supplied Jacob's Well with up to 640 liters of water per second. The flow was so strong that it created an upside-down waterfall on the surface, shooting several feet into the air, which caught the man's attention. After its discovery, a mill was constructed nearby to harness the natural water flow, operating successfully for many decades. However, in the mid-20th century, construction activities in the area began to damage the Trinity Aquifer, reducing the flow to Jacob's Well from towering jets to a mere ripple on the river's surface. This unintentional consequence of human activity also unveiled a deep underwater cavern from where the water emerged. Today, if you approach Jacob's Well, the riverbank slopes down to a flat yellow rock forming the riverbed, which is typically shallow and bright, but where the jets originate, the riverbed suddenly plunges into a deep blue abyss, creating a stark contrast to the surrounding water. Jacob's Well resembles a miniature version of the famous blue holes found in oceans. It's about 12 feet or 4 meters wide, located in the riverbed. Standing at its edge, you might only be ankle deep in water, but looking down, you'll find the bottom of the well nearly invisible due to its depth. Just like blue holes, the limestone rock around Jacob's Well has been gradually worn away by the flowing water, creating a vast underwater cave system. What you see in the riverbed is only a small part of its actual size. Initially, the strong water flow made it too challenging for divers to explore the cave beneath Jacob's Well, but as the current slowed, divers and scuba enthusiasts began venturing into the freshwater blue hole. While many people visit the area to swim and cliff jump, some are drawn to the mystery below the surface. However, over the years, tragic accidents during dives have given Jacob's Well a notorious reputation as one of the deadliest dive sites, not only in Texas, but worldwide. In September 1979, two men, Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear, decided to go on a camping trip to Jacob's Well with a few other divers. The plan was to dive the first and second chamber of Jacob's Well, as they are significantly easier to dive than the deeper third and fourth chamber. But what the group didn't know was that Kent had always had a fascination for the underwater cave system. Since they planned to explore the cave, they figured nighttime would offer solitude without other swimmers around. At midnight on September 9th, the group entered the water and descended to the first chamber, about 25 feet deep. Jacob's Well consists of a series of descending chambers, each smaller than the last. A narrow corridor leads from the first chamber to the second chamber, which drops vertically to about 55 feet. Beyond that lies a third chamber, descending diagonally to around 75 feet deep. The challenge lies in the narrow opening between the third and fourth chambers, which require divers to remove their tanks to pass through. At that moment, Kent found himself grappling with conflicting stories about what lay beyond the narrow opening. Some claimed it was a dead end, while others hinted at the possibility of a vast chamber waiting to be explored. Despite the ominous accounts of 4 previous divers who never returned, Kent, driven by curiosity and adventure, couldn't resist the allure of the unknown. So, accompanied by his friend Mark and another diver named Joe, Kent descended into the third chamber. As they approached the small opening to the fourth chamber, Joe watched in horror as Kent and Mark began removing their tanks and swimming into the darkness without a second thought. They lacked backup lights or safety lines, and Joe couldn't comprehend their impulsive actions. He flashed his light desperately, trying to signal them, but Mark disappeared into the void without acknowledging the warning. Joe, feeling a sense of dread, realized the gravity of their situation. Kent and Mark were using steel tanks with less air capacity than his aluminum one, and venturing deeper into the cave meant they would consume air more quickly. Checking his gauges, Joe knew that if he ran low on air, their predicament would escalate rapidly. In a final attempt to communicate, he banged his tanks with his dive knife and dropped his light into the opening, hoping it would guide them back. With a heavy heart, Joe ascended to the surface, uncertain of his friend's fate. His fears were confirmed as he sat on the water's edge, removing his gear and witnessing the once clear water turn murky brown. It was a chilling sign that something had gone terribly wrong. Either Kent and Mark were in a state of panic, stirring up silt, or a catastrophic event like a cave-in or gravel slide had occurred. Regardless, Joe knew in his gut that his friends wouldn't be returning from the depths of Jacob's Well. Hours later, the rescue team arrived at the scene, where the remaining group members had been tirelessly searching for Kent and Mark. Exhausted and shocked, they had yet to find any trace of their friends. As the rescuers debated whether to proceed immediately or wait until morning, Don Dibble, the rescue team leader, remained uncertain about the situation. He decided to send 2 divers down to assess the conditions and locate the bodies. To their dismay, the divers discovered that the opening to the fourth chamber was nearly blocked by gravel, making it impossible to locate Kent and Mark. Upon surfacing, they informed Don of the dire situation, prompting him to postpone the operation until the next day, when they could assemble a larger team with better equipment. The following morning, with a full team in place, divers descended into the water armed with trowels, attempting to clear the gravel blocking the entrance. Unfortunately, their efforts seemed to worsen the situation as more gravel slid in to fill the void created by their digging. Faced with limited progress, Don decided to take matters into his own hands. He descended into the water, dropping a spare tank at the bottom of the first chamber and running a safety line along the entire route. Upon reaching the entrance to the fourth chamber, he realized it was obstructed by a massive pile of gravel, and with only about 10 minutes of air left, he wedged himself into the crevice, hoping for a small glimpse of Kent and Mark. However, his attempt was met with frustration, as the water current kicked up silt, obscuring his vision. In a moment of panic, he realized the dangers of dislodging the gravel mass, but before he could react, his torso and arms became trapped, rendering him unable to grab his safety line as the area filled with silt. Trapped in the silt-filled darkness, Don struggled to signal to his fellow diver, his movements hindered by the debris. Despite his expertise, panic gripped him as his regulator failed to deliver air. In a desperate attempt to free himself, he involuntarily spasmed, breaking free just as his companion thrust a new regulator into his mouth. As they ascended, Don's stomach expanded painfully due to the pressure change, causing excruciating agony. Rushed to the hospital and swiftly into surgery, it was discovered that the rapid expansion of trapped air had ruptured his stomach. After several weeks of recovery, Don eventually regained his health, much to everyone's relief. Meanwhile, another experienced diver took charge of the rescue efforts in Don's absence. Assessing the situation, he located Don's light where he had become trapped and realized that clearing the gravel was the only way to access the fourth chamber. With the arrival of specialized equipment, including a recompression chamber and a vacuum, the painstaking process of removing the gravel began. Despite the team's best efforts, the operation stretched from what was initially expected to be a one-day task into a week-long endeavor. Tensions escalated between city officials and the dive company over the mounting costs, leading to a temporary halt in rescue operations. As a last resort, a diver equipped with a camera was sent down to assess the progress. Initially disheartening, the footage revealed a glimmer of hope, a concentration of fish in a specific spot, suggesting that despite the challenges, progress had indeed been made. After painstakingly reviewing the footage, they identified a tank valve and a regulator that likely belonged to Kent and Mark. However, the rift between the dive company and the city remained unsolved. 12 days after the tragic dive, the search was officially called off. Months later, Don, eager to prevent further tragedies, arranged for bags of concrete to be lowered into the cave and spent hours constructing a wall over the entrance of the fourth chamber, equipped with a metal grate to allow water flow while sealing off access to the bodies. Don hoped to deter future divers from risking their lives. However, his efforts proved to be futile. Despite the barricade, the grate was removed within months, replaced by a defiant note, "You can't keep us out." Undeterred by the barrier, divers continued to explore Jacob's Well, pushing the limits of its depths. But Kent and Mark's story did teach us a valuable lesson that is widely regarded today. The first chamber is for amateur divers, the second is for novice divers, the third is for expert divers, and the fourth is for those who do not care about their lives. 4 years after Kent and Mark's deaths, and 3 years after the grate's installation, 2 aspiring instructors and experienced divers, Richard Patton and Clark McConnell, prepared to enter Jacob's Well. Venturing through the chambers, they reached the site where the grate had once stood. Whether cleared by divers or natural forces, the crevice was now wide enough for them to enter. Richard would go through the restriction first, but quickly began wiggling his way back out of the chamber toward his friend. Alarmed, Clark noticed Richard frantically swimming towards him, desperately trying to get out of the narrow entrance of the fourth chamber, and that is when he realized Richard did not have his mouthpiece or tank with him. Clark began to desperately try to pull Richard out of the narrow chamber. Once he exited the restriction, the two began buddy breathing. One diver breathes while the other holds their breath, something that is only done in emergencies. Swimming as quickly as they could towards the entrance, they safely make it out of the third chamber, but in the second chamber, they made a critical error. Like many limestone caves, Jacob's Well contains branching tunnels and passages. Ascending towards the exit, they encounter 2 similar-looking passages, a dangerous situation compounded by the absence of a safety line to guide their return. As Richard and Clark hurriedly ascended, sharing the dwindling air from their single tank, they inadvertently veered into the false chimney, a deceptive dead-end passage resembling the main chamber's exit, and as panic set in, they frantically searched for an escape route, unaware of their fatal mistake. Suddenly, their regulator ceased delivering air, leaving them stranded several feet below the surface. In a desperate bid for survival, Clark instinctively swam back the way they came with his last breath of air, emerging alone into the first chamber. He realized with horror that Richard was not with him. Clark would eventually make it out of the cave, but Richard was not as lucky. The final few moments Richard experienced were in total darkness as he desperately tried to find the surface. His body was eventually found jammed up at the very end of the false chimney. Don Dibble, deeply affected by the loss of his students, emphasized the stark differences between cave and open water diving. Yet despite the repeated tragedies, divers continued to push the boundaries of exploration at Jacob's Well. On February 26, 1984, scuba instructors John Wilcox and Danny Self, accompanied by experienced caver Wayne Russell, ventured on a meticulously planned expedition. The trio was well equipped, carrying a full wetsuit, a single 80 cubic foot tank, a single nose regulator with an octopus, depth and pressure gauge consoles, 2 to 3 lights each, and a spare 50 cubic foot tank. After starting their dive at Jacob's Well, they would meet at the first level in the first chamber at 25 feet under the surface. They would run a safety line from this point all the way to the beginning of the third chamber at 55 feet deep. They would then start a new line, which ran horizontally the length of the third chamber and halfway into the fourth chamber at a depth of 85 meters. It was at this depth that John and Wayne would remove their tanks while simultaneously checking their air pressure. Wayne would then lead the way into a narrow opening into a fifth chamber, pushing his tank in front of him. Additionally, he would continue to run a new safety line into the chamber. Meanwhile, Danny remained in the fourth chamber, maintaining the lines and exploring for the tanks left by the previous divers who had tragically perished. As John and Wayne pressed on into the unknown sixth chamber, their whereabouts concealed from Danny's view, the true extent of their exploration remained shrouded in mystery. Despite the risk, their quest for discovery propelled them deeper into the uncharted depths of Jacob's Well. In the fourth chamber, Danny discovered a small room with dimensions of about 8 feet high and 10 feet wide. Despite the cramped space, he managed to locate the tanks left by previous divers and secured them to a line before venturing into the narrow passage leading to the fifth chamber. With the tanks tethered, the passage felt even more restrictive, forcing Danny to maneuver flat on his stomach. Visibility worsened as he progressed, and anxiety mounted as the lines began to tangle. Taking a moment to untangle the lines, Danny retreated to the third chamber to await the return of Wayne and John. Meanwhile, in the sixth chamber, Wayne was surveying the expansive room using a 100-foot survey tape, while John documented their exploration with photographs. Although visibility deteriorated in the murky chamber, it was evident that the space was vast and muddy, posing a risk of silting out. Eventually, Wayne signaled to John that it was time to return, and they began their journey back along the safety line. During their return, John encountered a set of tanks stuck in the crevice between the third and fourth chambers, left behind by Danny due to entanglement issues. With concentrated effort, they managed to dislodge the tanks and proceed towards the third chamber, where they reunited with Danny. However, Wayne was nowhere to be found. Initially assuming he was occupied with tasks, they continued their decompression stops, hoping Wayne would join them soon. And as time passed without signs of him, concern grew. With limited air for decompression and no means to search for Wayne, they surfaced, hoping for a safe return. Tragically, Wayne's body was discovered the following day at the entrance to the fifth chamber. His mask was intact and his tank lay beside him, suggesting an unforeseen incident claimed his life. Despite efforts to uncover the truth, the circumstances surrounding Wayne's final moments remain shrouded in mystery. Jacob's Well would eventually claim the lives of 12 divers over the years, marking it one of the most dangerous caves in the world. This is mainly because divers have to remove their tanks to explore deeper than the third chamber, but that didn't stop expeditions over the years. In 2007, the Jacob's Well Exploration Project was formed to continue explorations of the cave. They would eventually create a detailed map of all the accessible passages, stretching more than 6,000 feet. To this day, others continue to dive and continue to have close calls, like this video from a diver in 2015 who lost his flipper. Don Dibble, the rescuer from the first story told, has dove the site many times as he owns a shop close by. His opinion on the cave? This is the horror story side of the cave. Jacob's Well definitely has a national reputation of being one of the most dangerous places to dive.